Hello everyone, I hope you can all hear me. If you are having any difficulty with sound or video, please put a comment in the chat box and I will try and help you. Welcome to bdhSterling's webinar today. Thank you for attending. The webinar will be on UK pension transfers and everything you need to know about them. That's especially if you live in Australia and have one of these pensions. We have on the presentation today myself, Charlotte Everard. I'm one of the financial planners based in our Perth office. We also have John Vales. John is another one of our financial planners and is also based in our Perth office. Finally, we have Nick Bond. Nick is the head of advice for UK pension transfers and is based in Sydney. The presentation will last approximately 30 minutes and we will have some time for question and answers at the end. If you do have any questions, please put them in the Q&A panel, which you should be able to see on your screen. If not, you can just click the Q&A on the top or the bottom panel and it should appear for you. So today's presentation is general advice only. It's our understanding on the legislation as at today. So please do not act on this because it is not based on your personal circumstances. If you would like to take advice or any more information, you can contact us after and we'll be happy to help you. So today's agenda. First of all, we'll go through the types of UK pensions you may have and why it may or may not be suitable to transfer them. We'll also discuss Curox, which may be a term you have heard before. We'll also detail the transfer process, a bit about bdhSterling, and then finally some times for questions at the end. So to start us off, I'll pass you over to Nick.
Good morning, good afternoon and good evening to everybody. I think that's covered all the time zones, I hope. So I'll start off by talking about what types of UK pensions you might have and why you may wish to considering transferring those. So the types of UK pensions that can be transferred, most company pensions can. So by company pensions, I mean defined benefit schemes, or you may be familiar with them as final salary schemes. Also defined contribution company schemes where your employer may have set up a scheme for you and they're paying in as well as you yourself. Private pensions where you may have set up a contract with an insurer such as Aviva or Prudential and you're making contributions or have made contributions into that. And also any public sector defined benefit schemes or final salary schemes that are funded. And by that I mean there's a pot of money to support all the members of that existing scheme. They can be transferred. So what cannot be transferred? Start off with the UK state pension. That's your national insurance contributions goes towards you accumulating the UK state pension. And when you get to the retirement age, 67 for most, but it can be sooner for some, that will pay you a weekly, a fortnightly, however you wish to choose to be paid. That will be paid to you by the government, and that can go directly to a UK bank account or a Australian bank account, but you can't physically transfer the capital value across. Okay. Government unfunded pension schemes. So what I mean by that is there isn't a pool of money. The current members pay for the retired members. And so examples of that are armed forces, police, fire service, NHS, teachers, etc. So they cannot be transferred. Also, any defined benefit schemes or final salary schemes that are in the pension protection fund, they would have gone in there because your previous employer could not afford to sustain that fund any longer. So the government now guarantee that pension income for you. And also any company pensions that are already in payment. So if you've already taken your final salary scheme, you might have got some tax-free cash at the start or pension commencement lump sum, and now you receive an annual pension. that cannot be transferred. You can't commute the pension for a lump sum, unfortunately. And likewise, any annuities that have been purchased with an insurance company that are already in payment, they cannot be transferred either. So yeah, types of company pensions, to go into a little bit more detail. So a defined contribution or money purchase, as you may be more familiar with, that is contributions that your employer has made on your behalf. So you know how much has gone in there physically, pound-wise, and your employer pays in, you paid in, and the fund will be growing, hopefully. That will determine the value that you will get at retirement. That will remain invested if you don't buy an annuity, and will fluctuate on a daily basis. Defined benefit scheme and final salary schemes, they are based on your salary at retirement and the number of years that you worked for that employer. So there's different types of final salary schemes, but loosely speaking, whatever your salary was at retirement or close to retirement, how many years you work for that employer will determine what pension income you will be entitled to at the scheme's normal retirement age. So it doesn't have a value per se as a lump sum. You have to ask for a cash equivalent transfer value to be calculated based on what that promise to pay you at retirement is. So if you're going to retire at 60, well, that's the scheme's normal retirement age. If your pension income's £5,000, the scheme will then work out a transfer value that they deem to be appropriate to pay you out as a lump sum if you decide to transfer out. So big questions are, why would you consider transferring? So we believe that currency control is important. The graph that you can see there, you can see lots of highs and lows and peaks and troughs in a relatively short time period. It's quite a small graph, but that runs from 2014 up to 2019. But the difference that the currency can make either to your income that you draw when you're in retirement or to the lump sum that you receive, converting into dollars takes out the risk, future risk of currency fluctuations. And if you time it well, obviously timing's very difficult or impossible with currency. It can be your friend, but we believe take out currency risk wherever possible for the long term, because your pension income, you want to be stable. You want to know how much you're going to be able to draw in retirement. So that's a big one, the currency side of things. Estate planning. So with a final salary scheme, normally, and look, there's lots of different types, but normally 50% of your pension income will pass to a surviving spouse when you pass away. It can vary, it can be 66%, it can be lower than 50%, but a lot of them are 50. If you're the sole survivor, if there is no spouse, and your children are over 23 and have ceased full-time education, then there'll be nothing to pass on to any beneficiaries. It will all fall back to the scheme once you pass away. Scheme funding deficit. So the final salary scheme has a pot of money that it carefully monitors and determines how much it's got there to pay the members. A lot of schemes, because they're very expensive to run, hence why they're no longer, or very few of them are offered these days. They're very expensive to run, and the schemes often run at a deficit because they have to invest the money very conservatively and can't often keep up with the returns required. So if the company can't afford to make these payments that it must pay on a regular basis, then if the scheme funding deficit gets out of control, that scheme could end up in the pension protection fund. Look, the government does guarantee that pension, but it takes away flexibility. Other things to consider. So investment control. You may not have your current schemes invested in line with your attitude to risk. So they may be too aggressive, they may be too conservative, they might not be setting on course to help you meet your retirement objectives, and you may wish to gain a bit of control over how those pensions are invested and the kind of returns that you're hoping to achieve to meet your objectives. Tax treatment. Now, again, this is a big one and makes pension transfers from the UK very attractive for a lot of people. When you transfer your fund from the UK to Australia, when you from the UK to Australia, when you reach retirement age and you start drawing an income from the superannuation scheme, that income is completely tax-free. Also, once you're in retirement phase in your superannuation scheme, there's no tax to pay on any gains or any dividends or any interest. It becomes a totally tax-free vehicle. So on income and on growth, is 0% tax. Makes it very, very attractive. The one tax to pay on transfer, though, however, is the growth from your date of arrival in Australia to the date that the funds are transferred to an Australian superannuation scheme, and that's taxed at 15%. So for some people, if they've been here a long time, they might have a fairly big tax bill, but we will work out whether or not that's a hindrance to transferring. For those that have moved here recently or are planning to move, the tax could be minimal or in some cases nothing. Consolidating your pensions. So you might have 3, 4, I've had clients with 6 or 7 pension schemes dotted around in various different insurance company or defined benefit schemes. Makes life difficult to look after those effectively on an ongoing basis. Inevitably, they just get left and not attended to. So looking to consolidate into one pot can often provide superior returns because the money's looked after. It's a lot less stressful also to have it all in one place. So why may it not be best for you? So I've spoken about the positive side of things, but it's not for everyone. It doesn't make sense for all individuals to move it across. So for some people, we obviously have fees that we charge. I spoke about the tax on the growth. Sometimes it's simply just not cost effective to move those pensions across, but we will tell you that. The current UK scheme that you're in may have some fantastic performance and has provided you with good returns, might be cheap fees. If we can't improve the situation, we may recommend that you stick with the existing scheme. Some schemes imply exit penalties, so you may have signed up for a period of time to that provider, and if you leave early, you may incur a penalty. And some schemes also impose market value reductions at certain times when the stock market becomes a bit bumpy. Also, if you've got a defined benefit scheme, a final salary scheme, you may not be comfortable taking on that market risk. So at the moment, if you do have one, all of the risk is with your employer. They've got to invest the money and make sure there's suitable amounts there to be able to pay your pension income to you at retirement for the rest of your life. Whereas if you come out of that, you're going to take on that investment risk. So that is not for everybody. Okay. So what are the options? So for those aged under 55, ordinarily what we would do is look to consolidate into a self-invested personal pension or a SIP or a private pension. You can't transfer to Australia until you reach age 55, but John will come on to that in a bit more detail in a few slides' time. So yeah, that's the option: consolidate, leave it, or simply leave it where it is. The current scheme may be perfectly suitable to meet your goals. So what are the benefits of a SIP? So we use a SIP because we're able to buy dollars, or the client's able to buy dollars at any given time. those dollars can also be invested in Australian assets. So not only are you taking the currency risk out, but you're buying Aussie dollar denominated assets. And it's very close, albeit the taxation treatment's a bit different, but it's very close to having an Australian super fund in the UK, or the closest we can get it. But importantly, you've taken that currency risk out. That currency, the currency is going to move all the time, sometimes with you, sometimes against you. But long term, we strongly suggest that that currency risk is removed. You can have as much input into the investment of your pension as you wish. So you might say, I'm really cautious, or I'm really aggressive, or I want to try and generate 6% returns a year. You might have a specific investment goal that you wish to reach. So a self-invested personal pension gives you what we call open architecture to be able to choose from a great deal of investments. What are the transfer options for those over 55? So again, John will go on to this soon and cover it in more detail, but you can transfer to a Curox, an Australian Curox, but it must be within the non-concessional contribution limits, or NCC limits as we shorten it to. The NCC limit is $100,000 per person per year. And you can utilise the bring forward provision, which allows you to roll 3 years worth into one, and in effect get $300,000 over in one transfer. Again, the option for over 55s, do nothing. You could leave your pension in the UK. For some people, it might be better to leave it in the UK and draw down from it. Again, these are things that we can assess once we're engaged and give you the most suitable advice. So I'll pass you over to John Bowers now, and he's going to discuss the Curox side of things with you. Over to you, John.
Great, yeah. Thanks, Nick, and yeah, hello everybody. As Charlotte mentioned in the intro, my name's John Vales. I'm one of the dual qualified advisors for bdhSterling from the Perth office. So Nick's now talked to you about the considerations really for and against potentially why you would move your UK pension to Australia. The segment I'm about to go into is really talking about how do you actually receive the funds. It's a bit of regulation, so bear with me. It's not always the most fun subject. So Curox, it's an acronym you'll see a lot if you do embark on this process. Curox, as it says there, it does stand for Qualifying Recognised Overseas Pension Scheme. Now, in effect, it's a framework from UK Hmrc. It was introduced back in April 2006 by the Labour government of the time. Really, they were trying to simplify pensions. Before then, it was a bit like a Wild West. There wasn't much framework in place. So on the 6th of April 2006, they introduced what was known now as A-Day. And the idea behind the Curox was to really streamline the process for a foreign pension transfer. The other main reason was to really prevent scams. And Hmrc started seeing a few of these coming through. So international advisors advising on taking your money out of the UK and investing it in a pension scheme which was unqualifying, okay? The final point is really Hmrc were looking to try and help monitor and even police the transfers more effectively. So it's a process, like I say, it's a framework set out by Hmrc. Today, Curox is really the go-to option for those who have left the UK and they're intending to retire abroad, but they still have a UK pension fund that's been accrued, and they're looking to, like we say, bring it across to the new country of residence. Now, before we go on to the next slide, I'm sure there's a few questions out there to say, you know, what if I don't bring my money into a Curox in Australia? I wish I could say it's, you know, that easy to bring your money to Australian Super or any of the other retail supers that we see on a day-to-day basis. Unfortunately, it's not. If it does go into one of those funds, it would be classed as an unauthorized member payment. And the headline figure to really take away is that Hmrc could tax you at up to 55%. So it's obviously something that we want to make sure we get it right the first time around. So legislative changes. again, dealing now with two different governments, as I'm sure you can imagine, there's been a lot of changes over the years, and there will be going forwards as well. So again, bdhSterling, one of our roles for our existing clients is to keep on top of all of these legislative changes to make sure that we can adapt to any strategy that we recommend. So we've listed a few here over the last few years. So April 2015, Nick alluded to the first point about unfunded government schemes. So really, these are the public sector style schemes. So NHS, fire, police. There's no pool of capital behind the retirement benefits here. Those schemes especially, they'd largely be funded by government tax receipts, okay? So on a year-by-year basis, that's how their funding comes in. The second point there, Hmrc introduced the pension age test. Now this really does affect Curox for us all. What this did was it prevented access to a pension, to a Curox, sorry, before age 55. And the reason for that, it brought it in line with how UK pensions work. Okay, so you may remember in the UK, we couldn't touch our UK pension until we're 55, and that's when we can retire. That caused an issue for all Australian superannuation, because as you may know, access to superannuation in Australia is based on one, the preservation age being met, which is typically age 60 now, but you can also get access to your super money in ill health or financial hardship. And it was the latter of those points which really didn't sit well with Hmrc. It was a way far too easily for people to get money into a Curox and then access their funds before age 55. So because of that, the next point shows overnight, over 1,600 Curox schemes were closed, which means that no further transfers from the UK could go into those schemes. As we sit here today, there's actually only 2 Curox vehicles that we can use to bring your money from the UK to Australia. One of those is what's known as a self-managed super fund, an Hmrc. You may have seen that as an acronym as well. And in the last 18 months, there's been another retail fund come to the market. So again, it's a very restrictive market, but we can assist you if you kind of want to explore that further. The final point is FCA licensed advisors. So back in 2015, anyone in a defined benefit pension scheme, which is like Nick said, where the employer bears all the risk involved. So all the investment risk and the income longevity risk as well. If your transfer value was below £30,000, what you can actually do is still transfer out without having any advice on it. Okay, it's not recommended, but you can do that. If your transfer value is above £30,000, you do need a pension transfer specialist to advise you on that. And actually, all 3 of us on the call today are PTSs. It's Hmrc's way of making sure that every member who has the consideration to move out of a DB scheme goes into it with their eyes wide open. So simple as that. Moving down to now March 2017, there was something called the overseas transfer charge brought in by the government. Now, this was designed to prevent beneficial tax treatments for people residing in the UK, but moving their UK pension to a Curox abroad. So typically, Malta was a very key jurisdiction where people were moving their funds across. Okay, so what Hmrc came out and said is that you now have to be residing in the country where your Curox scheme is also set up. If you don't meet that requirement, you'll be taxed at 25%. Okay, the relevant period for this test is actually 5 years from date of transfer. So again, you can make a very honest mistake with this, because you could transfer it to Australia, let's say, but in 2 or 3 years' time, you forget about the legislation and you go and live in Asia, let's say, or you go back to the UK. Under that scenario, you basically breached this overseas transfer charge requirement. So again, with bdhSterling, when we kind of talk to you about what your longer term plans are, what your objectives are, these are all the types of conversations that we need to know about to make sure we can recommend the most appropriate strategy for you. And the final one, July 2017, it's to do with the Australian side now. So Nick talked about one of the mechanisms we use to bring the funds across. So One of those being the NCC, which stands for non-concessional contributions. Back in 2016, there used to be $180,000 per year you could pay in. That's now dropped to $100,000 per year. So you can instantly see it's become more restrictive. It's going to take a longer time period if you do have a larger fund to get your money into Australia. What we're seeing is actually the Australian government potentially looking to increase that in the coming months. The idea behind NCCs is that they will be increasing with inflation every few years. And so over the next month or so, we might see that creep up to around $110,000 per year. As a final point, it's not on the slide, but there is a proposal in UK government right now, which is talking about increasing the UK pension age. It's currently age 55. They might by 2028 increase that to age 57. So again, there could be some changes to when we can actually implement these changes for future clients. Okay, so Curox responsibilities. I'll talk a bit about this now. So really the responsibilities of any Curox is joint between both the member and the scheme administrator, okay? So Hmrc can really target either one of those entities in order to make sure it's complying. There's a few things that we have to bear in mind. The first is what's called the member payment period. Really, this is that period where I mentioned about the 55% tax, which could be liable on your fund. The member payment period is that period where that could apply. So in effect, it's 10 UK tax years of non-UK residency. Okay, so really that's one of the main criteria that we need to make sure we retain the Curox for before we consider, rolling it out to a non-Curox fund, investing in certain types of what's known as taxable property under UK Hmrc speak. So taxable property would be like residential property, or it would be investing into collectibles, so artwork, classic cars, for example, all these kind of things that you can't hold under a UK pension. That limitation, that legislation must apply also in your superannuation too. So these are all the things that we have to monitor for at least, like I say, at least 10 UK tax years after you move away from the UK, but also 5 years after the transfer itself happens. So it's the longer of the two periods which all of this applies to. Great. And yeah, coming back around the benefits of a Curox, I think you can probably see what the benefits are. Nick talks a lot about what the benefits can be. And really, if you're living in Australia now, the main benefit is to have your UK pension alongside you. So you might have more comfort with the money being in Australia. You might feel that you can manage it more. You can have it in GBP or Australian dollars. And importantly, estate planning benefits. Under superannuation, if you were to pass away, 100% of your dependent, of your spouse, would inherit that fund with no tax implications whatsoever. So by bringing your UK fund across to Australia, that reinforces that benefit there. And the tax treatment benefits. So one is the estate planning aspect, but also the income through retirement. You get to preservation age in Australia and you can access your fund without having to pay any tax on the income stream that you draw down. So for the lifetime of your retirement, it can be a very effective thing to consider. And the final point is consolidation. Now, with a Curox, we can't roll the Curox, the UK pension fund, to a non-Curox fund, like I've talked about a few seconds ago. But what you can do is actually bring non-Curox money, so Australian money that you're maybe accruing now with your employer, into the Curox fund and run them side by side. So again, a lot of clients, they like to do that to consolidate all of their capital, especially if they're using something like a self-managed super fund, where with economies of scale, you can, so a bigger fund size, you can generate that economy of scale and you can reduce the effective charges. So again, this is more of the holistic financial planning that we kind of wrap around the UK pension transfer piece. but these are just additional considerations that stem from that initial conversation. And I believe, Nick, it's back to you.
Thanks, John. So we'll briefly talk about what the transfer process entails. So if you were to use BDhSterling, the first port of call will be a no cost, no obligation meeting. So we can carry it out face to face if we're able to in certain states, via a video call or phone call, whatever suits you. The idea is that we get to understand what you're trying to achieve, what your objectives are, and importantly determine whether or not we believe that the service would offer value for you, and you'd benefit from taking our advice. So once we've had that meeting, if you choose to progress with us, and if we think there's value for you to be had, what we will do is undertake to write a pension transfer analysis report for you. So in that report will be the do's, the don'ts, the whys, the why nots. We cover off lots of pieces about legislation and non-concessional contribution limits, transfer strategies. The whole piece is in there to enable you to make an informed, knowledgeable decision. So whether you do transfer or don't transfer, you're going to know why you've made that decision. Also importantly, we will make our professional recommendation to you based on what we think is in your best interest. So you'll then have an understanding of what we as pension transfer specialists believe is the right course of action for you. We'll again have a meeting to go through that report. There's a lot of information there. You'll no doubt have a number of questions that you'll want clarified. So we'd welcome that. And then if you choose to embark on the transfer process, the journey, then we will help you to either consolidate in the UK first, or transfer over to an Australian Curox once you've engaged us to do so. And we manage that process from end to end, take the stress out of it, talk to all the schemes. You don't have to worry too much about what's going on in the middle there. We do all of that for you. So why should you seek advice before you make a decision? As I said, look, you'll be able to make a knowledgeable and informed decision, but there are constant tax changes and legislation changes, as John alluded to earlier. Potentially sometimes there's things that we get a bit of a heads up on, so we're able to keep you abreast of those changes. Very importantly, if you do it incorrectly, there can be some big penalties, up to 55%. Also, something as simple as converting the currency with a bank instead of a currency broker can cost you a few percent potentially. So there's lots of value there that we can help you get, and also very importantly, confirming whether or not it is suitable to transfer that UK pension scheme. There's no good you transferring something and then down the line you find out that it hasn't been the best option for you financially. So back over to John, just to give a little bit of detail about BDH.
Yeah, great. So just to recap a few points you've already made throughout this presentation. So why BDhSterling? So firstly, what I'd say is, we are dual licensed advisors. So we're licensed both in the UK and also Australia. Importantly, we have boots on the ground, both from our UK office and across Australia, which means that we can provide that beginning to end service, and we don't have to outsource any of our research or advice pieces within this process. We can do it all internally, which we find gives our clients that streamlined service. So what I suggest, even if you don't deal with bdhSterling after today, is I would ask the question, who is giving me that UK PTS service if it's not that person that you're speaking to in the office? It's really important to make sure you know who you're dealing with. We're defined benefit scheme specialists. So not only are we those pension transfer specialists, those PTSs, but we're also a chartered firm. So the UK arm of bdhSterling has been recognized as giving the highest caliber of financial advice. So again, especially if you're dealing with what could potentially be a sizable portion of your total wealth, your UK pension, make sure that you deal with someone that knows who or knows what they're doing. What I'd say as well is that the advice is provided under one roof, but we don't just do the pension transfer piece. As I mentioned before, having that first conversation with us, it can often stem to other aspects of their financial planning. So whether that be Australian super, more holistic financial planning, or even tax advice. So we have BDH tax as part of our offering, and that can give you UK tax advice as well as Australian tax advice, just to really complement the piece and the service offering there. And then finally, bdhSterling, over 15 years of experience in UK pension transfer. So we are well versed in all areas of this process. Things do change very quickly, and we're in a good position to react as quick as we possibly can, and to understand all of the complexities of the ever-changing legislation.
Thanks for that, John. So that concludes the presentation for today. We'll go on to the question and answer section. We've got quite a few questions to get through, so I'll just start reading through them. So the first question we've got is, can we explain how drawing down from a SIP or a pension in the UK, how that is taxed in the UK and how it is taxed in Australia? So if you're an Australian tax resident and you're taking an income which is regular from a UK pension, there'll be no tax to pay in the UK. However, there will be tax to pay in Australia. The tax in Australia will be at your highest marginal tax rate. So what that means is it's added to your income here and taxed at whichever tax bracket it falls into. So it's up to yourself to declare that on your tax return when you're doing it to the ATO. So that's if the income is regular. On the other hand, you have lump sums which might come from foreign supers, such as UK pensions. They are taxed differently, and there is a taxable portion on there which will have to be calculated, and that's dependent on your personal circumstances. So the next question we've got, this one is for you, John. A question regarding the USS pension scheme in the UK, so the University Superannuation Scheme. It's just asking if that is an unfunded scheme in the UK.
Okay, great. Very simply, no, it's not an unfunded. That is one that you can approach the scheme. You can ask for a CETV, which is that cash equivalent transfer value. And the way that the mechanism works of the CETV is that once you receive the valuation, they will give you 3 months from writing out to you to decide whether you want to accept the value or not. So it's definitely something you can look into.
Thanks, John. So Nick, here's a question for you. Presumably, if you are a temporary resident, the income from a pension is not taxed.
Yeah, so yeah, if you're a temporary resident, any foreign sourced income is not taxable in Australia. However, if you are receiving income from a UK pension scheme, the UK will look to tax that at source. There is a double taxation agreement between the UK and Australia. I won't go into too much detail in this forum, but for temporary residents, you don't or can't take advantage of that. But on the plus side, any income outside of Australia is not taxable. But again, it will be taxed at source in the UK.
Thanks, Nick. Nick, this is another question for yourself. So someone is asking, for clarity, what do you do that advisors based in Dubai or Malta don't do?
Well, I could talk about this for ages, but I won't. It's a subject close to my heart. Firstly, big question is, why are they based in Malta and Dubai? Why are they not based in jurisdictions where the regulators can keep a watchful eye on them? I'll let you draw your conclusion on that. We are all pension transfer specialists, which means we have the qualifications to give advice on the UK side of things. So that recommendation, that advice that we're giving you is from us. That is on us. Our license is on the line. Should we provide you with any duff advice? We don't do that. So we're very, very careful in the advice that we give. And also we are licensed here in Australia. So we're able to look to the future and understand what your goals and objectives are. And for most people, that's moving it to Australia. In my experience, these people in Dubai and other places are only looking to get you out of your existing scheme, put you into a scheme that's not suitable for your long-term needs. And often there's some undisclosed fees in there that come and bite you down the line. But if you want more detail on that, more than happy to have a conversation and have a proper comparison between us and these other advisors offshore.
Thanks, Nick. John, here's a question for yourself. There's been a few questions around the non-concessional contribution limit and if it is just $100,000 because it can potentially be more.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so what everyone has is $100,000 as their annual allowance. But what you can do is you can bring forward the next 2 years worth of contributions. So that means that today, assuming you haven't used anything for this tax year already, you could make an NCCE payment of $300,000. You would then have to wait those 2 extra tax years for the allowances to replenish until you can then make further contributions.
Thanks for that, John. So we've had a couple of questions around if the PTAR, the pension transfer report that we provide, is enough for the UK defined benefit schemes because they require regulated financial advice. So that is correct. As both Nick and John have discussed, we have dual financial planners in Australia and in the UK. So what that means is if you have an advisor here who is a pension transfer specialist, they are qualified to give advice on the defined benefit schemes. So it's on our license, no outsourcing, it's our advice. So we're the advisors who, give you the advice, help you with the forms and things like that. John, I have another question for you. So if in retirement I were to live in the UK for 50% of my time and Australia for 50%, would this trigger the Curox penalty?
Okay, it's largely down to where your tax resident. So I'd say that to try and make yourself it's not necessarily where you spend all of your time. So 50% of your time in the UK maybe and 50% of your time in Australia. You may find that because perhaps your primary residence is in Australia still, that your tax residence is actually still Australia. So that's actually, I'd say there's much more to that question. I suggest also we have kind of tax advice to explicitly kind of look into that.
Thanks, John. We have a question here. Do you get any taper relief or allowance for CPI in relation to the tax on the growth of your fund since moving to Australia? So in short, you do not get allowances to reduce that for taper relief or CPI. In some circumstances, you could have that growth portion reduced. That does depend on your personal circumstances. It does also depend on, periods you might have been in other countries, and also your visa status now and when you came over. So it's a bit more of a complex answer. However, if you would like information on your personal circumstances, you can contact us and we'll look into that for you specifically. Nick, a question for yourself. How long would it take to exchange UK SIP funds from GBP to AUD? For example, if sterling appreciated quickly.
Good question. So that would largely depend on whether the fund was already invested in the UK. So if it is invested, we would need to sell down the assets, because the trustee, the SIP provider, needs to make sure that you've got sufficient assets to place a currency trade. So if it's invested, it would take 3 to 5 days to have the liquidity there to make the currency purchase. If it's not invested and it's sitting in cash, we can do that within the working day in the UK. So as long as we get the email through from the client within our Australian working day, we're able to pass that on to the UK office to process that trade from GBP into Australian dollars. That's if there's cash available. So instant, almost instant. If it's liquid, if it's not liquid, we need to make sure we sell down the assets, so 3 to 5 days for that.
Thanks, Nick. Another question we have here is around private personal pensions. So if you have a defined contribution pension, does it require FCA advice for the transfer? If you have a defined contribution scheme with no guarantees attached to it, then you do not need FCA regulated advice for that. However, if there are any guarantees with that pension, the UK pension company might ask you for it. And UK pension companies are starting to ask clients if they've taken advice. So even if it is a defined contribution scheme, they may still ask for maybe a copy of the advice, or they may just ask you a lot of questions around why you're doing it. Another question we have here, how long does the fund have to stay in the Curox registered scheme? So that's a little bit of detail that John went through earlier. In terms of accessing the funds once it's here, as soon as you meet a condition of release under the Australian rules, you can start to withdraw the funds. In terms of transferring the Curox to a non-Curox, such as your existing super, you'd have to meet a couple of rules. And again, that would depend on when you arrived here and when the transfer occurred. So if you do want information on your personal Curox you've got or potential Curox, then please get in touch and we'll go through that with you. So another question here, is Uni Super a Curox? Uni Super is not a Curox. Most of the funds that were Curox previously in 2015, they all got taken off, and now there's only a few, such as the self-managed super fund and retail Curox that John discussed. So you would not be able to transfer your UK funds to Uni Super. Okay, Nick, a question for yourself. Are stakeholder pensions and ISAs, are they treated the same?
So stakeholder pensions, in a nutshell, personal pensions. So yes, that will be the same treatment as we've discussed during this presentation. ISAs are nothing to do with pensions. They're individual savings accounts. So there's no age limit on transferring those or accessing those. So yeah, ISAs are easier to deal with, but stakeholder pensions are very much part of what we've discussed here as personal pensions.
Thanks, Nick. John, here we've got a question for you. Is there a cost of the pension transfer analysis report?
Okay, yes, there is. We do discuss that in the first meeting. It does actually depend on what type of scheme you have, because our charging structure does vary depending on whether it's a defined benefit type of pension scheme or a defined contribution / money purchase type of scheme.
Thanks, John. We have a question here. With the NCC limit, how long before moving to Australia should we seek advice? I would say you should seek advice as soon as possible. It's really not good to leave it to the last minute, because there can be things that can be done before you move to make it more tax effective for you. So we've discussed a lot about the advisors who are here in Australia. However, we do also have a UK office that specialise in Australians or British citizens who are living in the UK at the moment and planning to move to Australia or to return to Australia. So you can get in touch with us, as soon as you're ready, and we can go through the options with you. Nick, here's a question for you. I have been here for 20 years with a DB pension in the UK. If I transfer it over, will it be taxed in the UK, and at what rate?
So if you transfer it over to a Curox, there's no tax to pay in the UK. But if you do transfer it over to Australia into a Curox, Australia will tax you on the growth of the fund from your date of arrival in Australia to the date that the funds are received here in Australia. So with a defined benefit scheme, we will calculate and estimate the growth, which will form part of our advice and determine whether or not it's suitable to move it across. But yeah, ultimately that will work out what that date of arrival value was. And then it's taxed at 15% by the ATO when it is received here in Australia. Okay.
Thanks, Nick. John, this one's for you. When the 300,000 NCC is moved over, what options are available to access the funds and from what date? For lump sums and regular income.
Yeah, so once the funds are in Australia, although it's under the banner, if you like, as a Curox fund, you are under Australian legislation. So the fund itself is a superannuation. What that means is that once you meet a condition of release, which the main one that people would meet is age 60 and beyond, and also retired, then you can access your fund. But there are a number of other different ways to get access to it before that time too.
Thanks, John. We have a question here regarding a Malta Curox. So although the presentation has been around UK pensions to Australia, we do also specialise in offshore Curox, whether that be in Malta, Jersey, Guernsey, New Zealand, places like that. So we've had a question around a Malta pension that just asking if that can be transferred to Australia and if there are limits. So you can transfer any foreign pension scheme to Australia. There will be tax consequences like we've gone through on the presentation today. However, there are other options that we can discuss with you which might be more tax efficient for yourself. So I think if you do have a Curox that's not in the UK, in Malta, Jersey, etc., then definitely get in touch with us. We can go through the options with you because it is dependent on your personal circumstances, visa, things like that. So I would encourage you to get in touch with us. So we have another question here. John, this one's for you. Can a spouse combine their super in the UK before transferring to a self-managed super fund?
Sorry, Charlotte, I missed the beginning of that sentence.
Sorry, John. Can a spouse combine their super in the UK before transferring to a self-managed super fund? Okay.
So no is the answer. In the UK, there is no option to combine spouses' pension provisions into a single pot. The only way that you can combine is once it does land in Australia, and you can then establish a self-managed super fund where you're both members of the same scheme. But that type of functionality doesn't exist in the UK.
Thanks, John. We have a question here around the UK lifetime allowance. If I'm likely to reach the UK lifetime allowance, how does that affect a transfer to Australia? So the UK lifetime allowance on pensions, for those that don't know, is similar to the transfer balance cap here in Australia, 1.6 million that you can put into pension mode. So the UK lifetime allowance at the moment is £1.07 million. And that's the amount you can withdraw or transfer to a Curox without the lifetime allowance penalty. So the UK lifetime allowance penalty is either 25% if you take the excess as income, or 55% if you take the excess as a lump sum. So transferring to Australia, the excess tax on that is 25%. So it can still be transferred to Australia if you have an allowance here. However, there are ways that we can help you mitigate that tax, and for example, some lifetime allowance protection or other strategies that we do have. Again, I would encourage you to contact us to have a more personalised chat regarding that, because it will depend on a few items. We've had a few questions here on if we're going to share the recording. We will email that out to everybody that's attended today, so you can forward it on or rewatch it. That's absolutely fine. Nick, a question here for you. If you have no dependents and leave to, say, a non-dependent cousin, will it also be tax-free on death?
So from a UK perspective, depends on your age and where that dependent is living. So I can't really answer that without more detail. From an Australian perspective, if the dependent is not classified as a cis dependent within the Superannuation Act, then that dependent may have or will have some tax to pay on certain components within the superannuation fund. So not an easy question to answer without knowing detail, but yes, there could be some taxation to pay on some components of an Australian superannuation fund.
Thanks, Nick. We have a question here on the bringing forward of the non-concessional contributions. So at the moment, you can use what they call the bring forward rule to contribute 300,000 all the way up until age 65. There is legislation at the moment for this to be moved up to age 67. At the moment, it hasn't passed Parliament, but we are hopeful that will be in place by the end of the financial year. Nick, a question here for you. If already over 60, would I still have to keep any transfer in a Curox for 10 years before being able to roll it into another, or is it 5 years?
So the reporting period for the Curox is 10 years, but you need to make sure that, yeah, it's a minimum of 5 years if you're already living in Australia before you can roll from a Curox to a non-Curox, and that is from date of last transfer. So if you've had to do it on a series of transfers, it's the date of your final transfer to Australia that starts that clock ticking.
Thanks, Nick. John, this one's for you. If you are on a temporary resident visa in Australia, are you taxed by the ATO when you transfer your funds?
No, so under that scenario, if we do the transfer within 6 months, we can actually avoid what's called the applicable fund earnings. So if that is your situation, I do suggest you kind of engage with an advisor to speak about your options sooner rather than later, because there's potentially more flexibility with how we can assist.
Thanks, John. We have a question here around how long before reaching age 55 would you need to commence the process? So the average time to engage in bdhSterling and funds landing in Australia is about 6 months. So it's not a quick process. You know, we've had some that have gone through in 3 months, some that might have taken a year. So it really is dependent on your personal circumstances and the types of pensions you've got. Additionally, it's not just around age 55. You might want currency control before age 55 and investment advice on those dollars in the UK. That is something we can help with. So any age you are, I think it's worth just having a chat with us. The first meeting is no cost, no obligation. So even if you just want to have a meeting with us to chat through your options for the future, then that's absolutely fine. Nick, a question for you. My UK defined contribution pension is £500,000. This would take around 10 years to transfer to Australia. Is this worthwhile? I'm 57.
Yeah, it will take a significant amount of time to transfer, but there are ways we can accelerate that process, which we would obviously share with you if we have a meeting and you engage us. So there are ways to get it over a bit quicker. But again, without knowing your personal circumstances, I can't tell you whether or not it's worth transferring it over. But on the surface, if it's a defined contribution scheme, it certainly might be very attractive. But it would take you a good few years to get it all across. But as I say, we can do it. There are ways to expedite that should the situation arise that we're able to do it.
Thanks, Nick. We have a question here around Curox. Is it relevant if you're over 55 only? That is correct. Curox is only needed if you plan on transferring your UK funds to Australia and if you're over 55. If you're under 55, the funds would have to stay in the UK until you reach that age. Nick, a question for you. If you have not already taken any pension, the pension is in a SIP and you are in the UK, can you take a tax-free lump sum of 25% and then transfer it to Australia?
Good question. Depends on the size of the fund. If you crystallise, so taking the 25% is a crystallisation event. If you crystallise that fund, you are no longer able to make partial transfers. So if the fund is of a size where it's over the 300,000 maximum limit that we can get across in one go, then and you take that lump sum, then you won't be able to transfer it. So depends on circumstances. If the fund is sizable, you might scupper yourself and cause yourself a big problem. If it's a smaller amount, then and it falls below the non-concessional contribution limits, then you should be okay. However, definitely would speak to us or someone about it before you go ahead and do that. We'd like to really understand your personal circumstances.
Thanks, Nick. We have a few questions around transferring to Curox if you're still in the UK. Due to the tax penalties that John went through with regards to Curox, you can only open a Curox in the country you are a tax resident and residing. So if you were in the UK and you transferred the funds to Australia into a Curox, it wouldn't meet the UK legislation, so you would be taxed heavily on that. So it's not ideal. So you should prepare everything ready to go for before you move by working with an advisor, and then everything gets done once you do arrive in Australia. So we have a question here. When it is transferred, where is it held? So if funds are transferred within the UK, they would either go into the SIP or it may go into a personal pension scheme. If it is in Australia, it would go into a Curox. So you have the retail option, which is similar to super, which you may have here, or you have the self-managed super fund route, which can be made into a Curox. Okay. John, this one's for you. If one breaches the condition by moving back to the UK, what is the penalty?
So if you've brought your fund across to Australia and you lose your Australian tax residency within those 5 years, then you can be charged up to 25% on your fund. There are alternative strategies if you are planning to go back to the UK or indeed to any other location that you can do prior to leaving Australia. So again, if that's a potential scenario that you might find yourself in, please do talk to us, because we can implement some forward planning to prepare for that potential scenario.
Thanks, John. We have a question here. Did I understand correctly that I could not draw from a Curox for 10 years? So that's not correct. If you transfer funds here and you meet the Australian condition of release, which is normally age 60 and not working, or if you're still working 65, that's the main two rules. Once you meet one of those conditions of release, you can start to draw down the fund here via income or via lump sums. Okay. Sorry, just got quite a few questions. So we have a question here. I've already drawn down part of my UK defined contribution pension. Can I still transfer the remainder to Australia? So that depends on if the fund has been fully crystallised or not, and the value of it now. So I think you probably need to speak to someone about your personal circumstances and the type of pension you've got. We're more than happy to have a no obligation meeting with yourself. Okay. So John, this question's for you.
Mm-hmm.
If you only transfer 100,000 per year after 55, do you avoid all tax?
So there's two components to any UK pension transfer. So the mechanism, as Nick was talking about before, one is the non-concessional component, okay? But what you also have is something called the applicable fund earnings. Now, the fund earnings are the growth on the fund since you left the UK through to transferring your benefits to Australia. That applicable fund earnings component to your transfer will always be a taxable component. So whether or not you do $100,000 of non-concessional, or maybe even bring forward the next 2 years and do a $300,000 NCC, that doesn't get around or circumnavigate the AFE component. So that will be taxed at 15% still.
Thanks, John. So we've still got quite a lot of questions here. I don't think we'll have time to go through all of them today. So what we will do is we'll reply to everybody with the questions via email or by a telephone call if we do have your phone number. For those that have put an anonymous question without your name, please feel free to give us a call or send us an email, and we can certainly discuss the questions you've put in, because there are quite a few there. Apologies, we haven't got time to answer them all. There has been a lot there. What we will do is email a copy of the presentation to everyone, so you can rewatch it, or feel free to pass that on to anyone who you wish to. To contact us, you can email us on this email address here. Oh, sorry, just go off it. info@bdhsterling.com. So that's info and Oz, AUS, @bdhsterling.com. You can also phone us. The phone number is here, and it will also be on the email that will be sent to you. If you want to contact a specific office, you can also Google us and you'll find our office numbers. Thank you all for attending, and have a good evening.
Thanks all.
Thanks very much.